Okay, everybody, welcome back to Ronin's Den. We're doing the review from last month's one-shot of Palladium's version of Rifts. We did Savage Rifts earlier in the year with Jim Has Fun Online GMing, and this past month I GM'd a quick scenario for the Palladium version of the rules. Dragon was present for both of those games, so they got to play both Savage and Palladium, and Benny joined us purely for the Palladium side of things. So you look like you're about
Between the two,
Mm-hmm.
but are we going on Twitch at all, or is this just recording?
It's just recording.
Okay. I will say, being on both sides of that coin, the Savage Rifts and the actual Palladium Rifts, hands down, I'll play Rifts again for sure. As for Savage Rifts, not a chance. I would not play that again if you held a gun to my head and said, "Hey, you got to play this." Just not going to do it. That was so horrible. Not the story or anything. Like, nothing Jim did when he ran it. It just, oh my God, it was not a fun system.
In one or two sentences, can you explain what about Savage Rifts was different than Palladium Rifts that made it so much worse?
I think part of it was the action economy of Savage Rifts. You can't like split up things, so you have your movement, it's your movement. And it just felt like the combat in Savage Rifts was so mechanized that it was hard to like. It was a 3-hour combat, and I felt like we really didn't do anything. Where in the Rifts game, the combat felt pretty snappy. Like, I got into it pretty quick, and the resolution of that combat and your turn was really quick. Where Savage Rifts had this calculation you had to do, and I'm sitting there like, I don't understand what you're telling me. Like, what is the target number? Well, you got to roll this and then add these and then subtract this and add this. And I'm like, what? Rifts just roll this. If you get 5 or higher, you succeed. Okay, I'm in.
Yeah.
That was pretty much the big difference for me, is the dice resolution, how long combat took, and just like the layout of how to do things. You'd think for Savage Rifts, being the newer of the two, that the formatting would be better, and it just felt like Rifts was infinitely easier to understand.
One of the things from somebody who's played both systems, Palladium much more so, there is a definite difference in character feel as well. We didn't have one in this game, but there's a character in Rifts called a Glitter Boy. A Glitter Boy is a 9-foot sparkling chrome power armor with a shoulder cannon that when it shoots, it fires 200 Flechette-style rounds and generates a sonic boom. In the Palladium system that we played last month, that character is an absolute beast of a tank. Okay? You can run up and trade blows with giant robots. So I tried to do that in Savage Rifts, and I got stomped in one attack. I was nearly gone. So things that you're able to do in one system are no longer possible in the other, because Savage Rifts, in my opinion, failed at trying to speed up the combat resolutions. So they bill itself as the quick, snappy, savagely fast system, and to me it was a complete opposite. It was
not.
Yeah, it was a complete opposite experience. And that saddened me a little bit, because I really wanted Savage Rifts to be a lot more fun than it was, because more people are playing it now. And Rifts, which we'll get back to, full circle back to it, has a bit of a negative connotation around the system. Like, there's not very many people that talk about the system positively. You'll hear a lot of, I love the lore, I love the setting. It's too bad the game is completely broken and unplayable. It's a total mess. And to me, personally, and this is where I'll ask for both of your input, because you've both played Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder at some point in time. To me, it feels very similar to Dungeons and Dragons, at least on the combat side of things. Roll a d20, plus minus modifiers. You have a target number to hit. If you pass it, you succeed. If you don't, you fail. Rinse and repeat. Is that accurate? How do you guys feel about the combat in that comparison? We'll start with Benny.
For the combat, I would say that is very accurate, and I don't know what the leveling scheme on Palladium Rifts is, but something that is a real problem in Dungeons and Dragons combat is that you can have too many things going on modifying what it is you're doing, and that can slow down combat because it's, well, I got to add one and I got a -2 and I got to this, that, the other. And do I have advantage and on and on. And in addition, it seemed like we were a fairly low level party, but there was more than one chance to do something in combat, which is a real problem with a lot of TTRPGs at low level, because in Dungeons and Dragons or in Pathfinder, if you're a level 2, I don't know, ranger, and you only have one chance to attack, it kind of sucks because if you miss, your turn's just blown. So in that regard, I like the system very much, because as I remember it, it seemed like every time it was your turn, there was a chance to try a couple of times. And that just made the action economy work in a way that it wasn't faster, but it was more fun.
I can agree with that. I think the resolution mechanic is very similar to D&D, right? You roll the D20, you beat a target number. I think where the system deviates is in the skill being a D100 instead of just another D20, which I don't have a problem with. I like rolling the D100 and I like the D100 style of things. I do think, like you said, Benny, you had a lot of options to do things, but also with my character, the dragon, I had psionic abilities, I had physical abilities, I could go invisible, I had skills. Like I felt like my level 1 dragon was far more, it could do far more than any character I've ever played in a level 1 game of D&D. I at no point did I feel like, oh, I'm stuck doing the same thing every time. Like, I had telekinetic abilities. Granted, we were fighting some big things and the damage was more what we should have been doing, and that's why I kept attacking. But I had telekinesis, I had healing, I had regeneration, I had all this type of stuff. And it felt, the mechanics themselves felt like D&D, but I could definitely say the game as a whole did not feel like D&D. I felt like I was playing something very different and very specific. And I like systems that know what they are and do what they do. And I feel like Rifts had that going for it.
On that note, where you felt like you had all those different things going, that's because one of the key differences between Rifts and a system like D&D, in Rifts you do level up. It's experience point based. It's level 1 to 20 is your base level range. But most character abilities in the Palladium system are front loaded onto you. So you get access to almost everything your character can do from the beginning, and everything just gets incrementally better and easier for you to do as time goes on. Psychic characters get more psychic powers as time goes on, because every time they level up, they have the opportunity to just manifest more powers. Magical characters can either buy new spells whenever they want them, as long as they can find it for sale. So you're not bound by spell slots or your character level being a determining factor for you to cast a spell. You just have to find the spell, either written down on a scroll or being willing to be taught by another player. So that's why you felt like you had a lot more abilities there. It's because they all get front loaded in a Palladium system.
Which I think is pretty cool. I like having a lot of options at level 1. I think that's a lot of reasons why you hear it all the time. D&D players will be like, "Oh, starting at level 1's dumb. You need to start at level 3 because you have more options and you can do more things." Where I don't think you would ever hear, if people played Rifts, like if it had the player base of D&D, I don't think anyone would ever say, "Oh, you guys start at level such and such." You could start at level 1 and feel unique every time.
Let's start this one with Dragon. What did you not like about the system?
I think the thing that was hardest for me to like really wrap my head around was mega damage and standard damage and hit points. And it wasn't that I didn't get that like 100 hit points or hit points in SD are the same, and 100 of them are 1 mega damage. I think it was just like the disparity between what deals mega damage and what doesn't. Because like the Sarco dealt mega damage, but a pistol doesn't. And I'm like, I just like it was weird to me that some things dealt mega damage, and then there were other things that I thought like, well, that's seems like it would be infinitely more deadly. But it was just that disparity to me, and it was one of the things I couldn't wrap my head around. But that's also not knowing the system. And the other thing that I really did not like when I was looking at my character sheet and going to the book, to find the psychic abilities, you have to go to the psychic like class. And there should be it like I could not find it because it's not in the table of contents. You just somebody had to tell me, hey, it's on this page. I'm like, okay. Formatting. Whoever does riffs. Formatting, man.
Yep. Let's bounce that same question over to Benny.
Before I answer, I don't understand why so many TTRPGs have this problem with formatting. You all heard me complain about the 5e Player's Handbook, where to find out how much gold a given class starts with, you don't look in the class section, you look in an obscure part of the equipment section. And the Player's Handbooks for things like Vampire the Masquerade are just infamous for going out of their way to not convey information to you. To answer your question, though, I was playing the Psy Hunter, and part of this is because I don't know the system and I was new to it, but I expected most of the things I would be doing in something like combat as a Psy Hunter to involve some kind of psionic ability. And while that theoretically was available to me, the best thing to do in combat just involved using a rifle and a sword, respectively. And it wasn't wrong per se, but it's a little bit like if you say, okay, you're going to play an archer or a sniper, and then your character winds up doing most of their damage at close range with a dagger. Like, I could see how a sniper might carry a knife with them, get into a close range fight, and that's how they win. But it feels like it should be built out in such a way that that's not what usually happens. Now, my guess is that in the system, it would be a situation where when you level up enough, your psychic ability would become a lot more powerful than those weapons. Stuff like that does exist in Dungeons and Dragons. Like if you get a Vorpal weapon at a low level, the weapon is the best thing you're going to be able to do, whereas at higher levels, your abilities become more important. But that part of it was a little bit disappointing to me, and it fed into a larger problem. What you were talking about the system being this convoluted mess is that when I looked at that Player's Handbook, it was like 180. It was basically a novel, and there's no way I'm going to read through and get some realistic grasp of what's going on to not have those kinds of surprises.
Yeah. One of the things I'll say about this system, it's not designed for one-shot play. It's definitely designed for campaigns and sustained, like, week over week, we're going to pick up where we left off, because that is when you're actually going to see this, like, Psy Stalker and different magic classes really start to outshine their technological counterparts, because you have an infinite refillable energy source as a magic user or a psychic, whereas a technological character has to rely on their ammunition and their armor. The Psy Stalker is going to be able to use their abilities to track down supernatural creatures and basically run them down like a hunter. That's going to be their thing, and they're going to be able to hide and dodge and get in and out of combat, hit and run tactics. Eventually, everybody's going to be out of ammo in their Eclipse, but the Psy Stalker still has psychic abilities they can bring to bear. While their armor's tattered, they can create a psychic body field. And that's an issue when you're not doing a sustained campaign where those abilities are going to be able to come out and really shine. So I will definitely say this is not designed for one-shot play.
Well, something that both D&D and Vampire, because those are the systems I have the most experience with, so I'm referencing them, something both of them get right is so like in D&D, they have the proficiency system, whereas if you're playing a wizard, you are almost certainly not proficient with something like longsword, so you use your spells because that's the option you have. Whereas in Vampire, depending on what clan you are, you have abilities where if you're if you're playing a Brujah, it doesn't make sense to rely on anything but brute physical attack because that's what a Brujah is good at. Whereas if you're playing a Toreador, you're going to do something else and so on. And I understand what they were going for with the system. They want to have this infinite possibility of builds, but it has some major drawbacks, and it has some. I'm playing a psychic who's just you, and before okay, two things, and then I'll stop rambling. One, it's just weird to be playing a psychic that's not defaulting to their psychic abilities, but on the other side of it, I do understand the appeal of actually the opposite situation. You revert to using a weapon when your psychic ability or your magic is tapped out. The whole I'm out of spells, but I'm not out of shells thing. But it should be the last resort for a character like that to rely on a physical weapon, in my opinion.
I can definitely agree with that. I think now that you mention it, I if I were looking back at that game, I would not have realized you were a Psy Stalker unless outside of you telling me you were a Psy Stalker. Like you shot and used a sword, and that now that you say it, that is kind of weird. But I think a lot of games like Rift, Dungeons and Dragons is another one I think are bad for one shots. People would probably disagree with me about the D&D one, but I think there are a lot of systems that are just not good at one shots. Yeah. And it's because the fun of a system like Rifts, like D&D, to me, is the improvements you get. The long-term leveling up and progressing your character, where I think there are better story games for a one-shot story. So this wasn't a bad one shot. I had fun. I just I think for the story that we were trying to tell there, I think another system probably would have been better for it. But I enjoyed Rifts a lot. I thought it was, from the horror stories that I have heard about Rift, I disagree with most of what I've heard. I think it was fun. It was okay. I have nothing terribly bad outside of the formatting. It might be the worst formatted book I've ever seen.
I think the only reason why people say D&D is suitable for one-shots is because almost everybody in the TTRPG space has some concept of how especially 5e works. So it's not that the system is well designed for that. It's just that because there's this massive player base, you can make it happen. If everybody played Rifts, then putting together a Rifts one-shot would not be hard to do at all.
And back in the 90s, Rifts was the major competitor for Dungeons and Dragons. Before Vampire came out, Palladium was the other system, at least in all the circles I ran in. One last thing I want to talk about on this. We didn't get to do it on the one shot because we were kind of running on time, but something that gets talked about a lot, at least in the D&D area, from what I hear, is like this debate of experience versus milestones, and the fact that Dungeons and Dragons only gives you experience for killing enemies. Like, the only way you can earn experience is to kill enemies. So it encourages the murder hobo. I think we all agree to that to some degree. You know, D&D has a crappy experience system. It really does revolve around killing enemies. At least if we're talking about 5th edition. Older editions had other ways to earn experience, but the standard experience in 5th edition is killing enemies. Rifts handles experience in a different way. And I just want to kind of go through that real quick with you guys and just get how you like this item. And if you think it's a good way of doing things or just get your general opinion on it. So in Rifts, at the end of every session, what you're supposed to do is sit down with the GM, and we would go through and ask you these questions, and you would mark off on another sheet, yes or no. And this is how you would earn experience. Every time you perform any one of your character's skills, you get 25 experience points. If you have a clever but futile idea, you would get 25 experience. Clever and useful ideas would get you 100. Quick thinking or actions could get you 100. A critical plan that saves characters or comrades could net you 200. You get anywhere between 400 to 1,000 for a critical plan or action that saves a group or many people. You get experience for endangering your own life. You get experience for self-sacrifice, potential life or death situations. If you're in one of them, I'm sorry. You get experience for avoiding unnecessary violence. Experience for deductive reasoning and insight, good judgment, playing in character, showing daring. And then when it comes to killing enemies, they only rate them by 3 categories: minor, major, and great menaces. So you get the experience points for either killing or subduing a minor, a major, or a great menace. How do you feel about how an experience award like that goes out? Because it could be individual, because some people might use more skills than others. See, that people are definitely have different ideas. And compared to, say, Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinders standard Goblin 25 experience.
I'll let you start on this one, Benny.
So I don't, even when I play 5e, I don't play with the Goblin 25 experience. It's always milestone, and it's always everybody levels up together because I really despise the situation where you have party that are at a range of levels. That it just makes it a nightmare for everyone involved, in my opinion. I'll be honest with you, Duality, when you were explaining that, I just tuned you out about a quarter of the way through. Whoever designed this system well and truly outsmarted themselves. I understand what they were trying to do, but the problem with that situation is that in some ways, you're creating a situation where you're taking a problem, which is the problem of the only way to get experience is to kill things, and you potentially have very uneven experience because the equivalent of a fighter is going to kill a lot more things than, let's say, a healer, or if somebody's just absent that week. And you're making it much worse because you're having all of these things that could happen for one player and not for another. Also, a lot of it is very subjective, which could cause problems at your table. And some of the, especially when you give bonuses for how people play, I do understand wanting to encourage good and creative and thoughtful role play. The problem is there are too many players in the space who don't understand that good and thoughtful and creative role play doesn't mean talking the entire session. And sometimes the best thing you can do as a player is be quiet and let somebody else have their moment. And I feel like what you're describing actively discourages that.
Okay.
I don't know. I feel like Milestone's just better. I agree with Benny on that. I don't even know that I like that. I think there are a lot of really interesting experience systems or systems out there that do experience in interesting ways. I like systems that when you fail a roll, you get experience. I think that's narrative and it's fun and it's interesting. And a person who's rolling really, really well isn't going to get as much experience, but they're getting story beats and this and that. And if you roll poorly, you get experience so that you fail less. I feel like this one is, like Benny said, a lot of that stuff is subjective, right? I might think something is a really, really good idea. And I might full-heartedly believe that that is a really good idea. And the game master could be like, that's a fucking stupid idea. What the fuck are you doing? Like, what do you mean that's a good idea? You're a dumbass. Like, it's so, like, it becomes a built-in argument thing. But I also think that getting experience from only killing monsters is dumb. Like, I had an argument on TikTok very, like yesterday with someone where they're like, oh, well, I don't agree with Milestone because if someone misses the fight with the blue dragon, why should they get to level up? I've had people get very mad and threaten to leave my table if I were going to let them level up. Well, you're playing with children. Like, why would you let people like that sit at your table? Like, what are you talking about? These are your allies. You want them to be as strong as you. If they are weaker than you, they're not helpful. I want my allies to be getting better and stronger so they're more useful to me. Like, what the fuck is going on? Why are we having this argument? Well, I've seen people flip tables over loot, and you let them come back to your table? Like,
Yeah. No.
what is wrong with you? Like, if someone flips my table because that person wants the sword and that person wants the sword, and you want the sword, so you flip the table because I'm getting that sword no matter what, get the fuck out of my house.
Yeah.
Like, get out of here. You are not welcome at my table. Like, I feel like there's so much conflict around leveling up and experience. It's like, we're here to have fun. We're here to have a good time. I don't care if I'm leveling up and you want to level up. Cool. Do it.
Yeah.
Like,
there you go.
And what I would add to what you just said is that in particular, the situation where you get experience for avoiding violence, I think what game designers are sometimes doing is they're trying to design people being decent human beings into their game. And you can't do that. You just have to have people be decent at the table. You have to have people be willing to just say, I'm not going to play with you if this is how you're going to play.
Yeah.
You know, I've had the situation where I've left tables because of some kind of disagreement, but it's like either I was wrong or the table was wrong. But either way, I didn't belong at that table because there was this fundamental disagreement. And if you can't work that out like adults, I don't think any system is going to save it for you.
Yeah. Well, that was the last thing I had was, the experience chart. Mind you, everybody, the system was made back in the 80s. So it is archaic. This was a trip down a time capsule, pretty much. I'm glad that we all had things that we liked and we didn't like about it. This was a lot of fun. I can't remember. We're doing Alien next month for our one shot.
we are.
Well, this month I should say.
We always do a rating at the end of every one of these
yes.
episodes. So I'm going to ask Benny.
Yes, the rating.
Scale of 1 to 10. How likely are you? What would you rate Rifts, and how likely are you to play it again?
On a scale of 1 to 10, I would probably give it I'll say a 6. I like the character options. I like the lore a lot. I love systems where you have somebody with a sci-fi ray gun and mech suit right next to somebody with a sword, and one of those is not more powerful than the other necessarily. The reason for the low rating is because of just the convoluted rule set, the bad formatting, all the stuff we talked about.
Okay.
I'm going to give it a little bit higher. I'm going to give it a 6.5. All for the same reasons. Being able to play a dragon it instantly puts it at a 5 for me. And then I liked the mechanics of the game pretty well. I just, as Benny said, the formatting of the book it's impossible. Like, if you don't know someone who knows where everything is, you're gonna just sit there and dread looking at that book.
Yeah. Having myself in Changeling there was definitely a bonus when it came to finding stuff. Yeah. But awesome. Well, thank everybody for showing up. We will be doing It Was Alien at the end of this month for our one shot, and next week we have Alice from Faypop. Is that our guest?
Yep, Alice Faypop is our guest next week. We are super excited to have her on the show. It'll be an interesting conversation for sure.
Awesome.
That's awesome. They make some great content on TikTok.
Absolutely.
Absolutely will. So thank you for showing up, everybody, and we will catch you next time in the den.